Hi friends, if you are new here, I'm Sophie Bao. The purpose of this channel is to share factual information with everyone out there who's seeking the light of truth. Today's topic is about China's poverty alleviation. But before I start, I want to thank everyone for your support. Especially, I want to express my gratitude to those who have subscribed. Your like, comment, and share is a great way to support this channel. So thank you. China's poverty alleviation is a massive project that spans several decades and involves many generations. My video will not be able to do justice to the enormous effort China made. What I will do today is to provide you a picture of what it means when China finally declares it has eradicated absolute poverty by the end of 2020. I also recommend that you watch CGTN's documentaries on poverty alleviation. I will include the links in the description below. Here's today's agenda. I will firstly talk about what poverty is. What are the different poverty lines and how to compare them? I will then talk about China's achievements and how China did it. Finally, I will share with you a life story from my own extended family, how their lives have transformed since 1978, when reform and opening up first started. To conclude, I will briefly touch on China's contribution to the world and what China will do next in terms of poverty alleviation. So let's get started. What is poverty? According to the UN definition, poverty entails more than just the lack of income and the productive resources to ensure sustainable livelihoods. Its manifestations include hunger and malnutrition, limited access to education and other basic services, social discrimination and exclusion, as well as the lack of participation in decision-making. When societies tend to pay more attention to the rich and powerful, poor and vulnerable people's voices are not heard. Governments around the world should direct more of their attentions and resources to the less privileged. This is what the Chinese government is doing, which won them wholehearted support from the Chinese people. What's the international poverty line? The international poverty line is at $1.9 a day, which was set by the World Bank by using the price in 2011. What is the goal of UN on poverty? UN plans to end poverty in all its forms by 2030. What is China's poverty line? By using the price in 2010, China set its new poverty line at 2,300 yuan per person per year, which is about 6.3 yuan or $0.94 per person per day. But China's poverty line goes beyond using daily income as a barometer. It also includes 2 assurances and 3 guarantees, which is to ensure the food and clothing needs of the rural poor population and guarantee they have access to compulsory education, basic medical services, and safe housing. Now let's take a closer look at the 2 poverty lines. With $1 difference between them, it is easy to jump on such conclusion that China has set its bar lower than the international standard. But this is not true. In order to make a fair comparison, purchasing power parity (PPP), which compares different countries' currencies through a basket of goods, needs to be taken into account. It's important to point out that China set its poverty line using the price in 2010, whereas the World Bank using 2011. Using 2011 as a base point, China's rural poverty was pegged at 2,536 yuan per year, or 6.95 yuan per day. According to the 2011 PPP, $1 in 2011 was equivalent to 3.04 yuan, which means China's rural poverty line is at $2.3, which is about 20% higher than the global standard of $1.9. This graph further illustrates that, by the international standard, China has a smaller proportion of rural population living in poverty, which means that China has set its standard higher than the World Bank's global standard. It's also important to point out that China adjusts its poverty line every year to reflect the inflationary pressure faced by the rural population, using 2010 as a base, which means that the poverty line is not a static number of 2,300 yuan, as illustrated in the graph. If you have any questions on this, please leave them in the comment area. Thank you. Great, now we can move on with a clear understanding of poverty line. Is China on track? Let's find out. China's fight against poverty can be traced back to 1978, when the country first started its reform and opening up. Since then, tremendous progress has been made. Since taking office in 2012, the Chinese President Xi Jinping has made the eradication of absolute poverty the threshold requirement of realizing the first centenary goal of building a moderately prosperous society in all respects by 2020. What does it mean to eliminate poverty completely by 2020? It means that the number of rural population living below the poverty line will be reduced to zero by the end of 2020. It also means that the number of impoverished counties will be reduced to zero by 2020. Here are some of the highlights of China's achievements. The World Bank data suggests that China has lifted 850 million people out of extreme poverty, representing more than 70% reduction in global poverty and the highest ever recorded in human history, winning praise from the UN, World Bank, and many world leaders. Through sustainable economic measures, China, as the world's second largest economy, has been growing steadily with an average GDP growth of 10% per year, reducing the country's poverty rate from 66.2% in 1990 to nearly 0.5% in 2016. According to the 2018 figure, the average annual income of the rural residents living in impoverished areas rose to 10,371 yuan, which is about $1,530, with an inflation-adjusted year-on-year growth of 8.3%. And the living conditions and public services have been markedly improved. This graph compares GDP and per capita disposable income in 2010 with 2019. It shows that China's GDP in 2019 is 2.4 times larger than it was in 2010. The disposable income in the urban area has risen by 2.2 times, whereas in the rural area, it is 2.7 times more than it was in 2010. These are the few highlights of China's achievements. How has China done it? In my first video, I chose to talk about the cornerstone behind the China miracle, as I believe it is the foundation on which China builds. The cornerstone, if you recall, is made of three integral parts: China's socialist system, the CPC leadership, the Chinese people, and civilization. Bearing this in mind, let's take a closer look at the policy and approach that the Chinese government has taken to eliminate poverty. China's tremendous accomplishment is a direct result of the effective implementation of evidence-based policies that focus distinctively on building robust local industries, mitigating corruptions, and improving the standard of living by making quality education and healthcare accessible to the citizens. Since 2013, China has carried out targeted poverty alleviation program, under which government-appointed officials are made accountable for containing poverty. They are not allowed to merely handing out relief funds without finding ways of attaining sustainable incomes. Instead, they have to carry out a thorough assessment on the local resources, environmental conditions, and the culture, and draw up tailored relief plans for each impoverished county. At the national level, China has been deploying considerable public and private resources in poverty-stricken areas, which will help generating new employment opportunities for poor people, and at the same time provide them the access to the existing job markets. Governments at all levels are doing so by expanding manufacturing facilities and other industrial setups, as well as relocating impoverished populations from poor regions to better developed areas. So far, the government has established more than 100,000 industrial bases, covering 92% of the poor households in the impoverished regions. This move has raised 70% of people out of poverty in these areas. The government also commenced a resettlement program in 2015, with the aim of moving nearly 10 million impoverished population from the poor regions to better areas by 2020. In addition to this unique provision, the Chinese government also creates an enabling business environment to support a sustainable source of livelihood in these communities. The Chinese government has put in place an inclusive program enhancing the scope of the digital economy, such as e-commerce and online payment system. It intends to empower the poorest of the poor by connecting them to the mainstream digital marketplace through the help of technology. The government has also provided access to compulsory education, skill development, and financial aid for developing entrepreneurship in the impoverished regions. For instance, the skill development program has so far helped more than 300,000 people emerge above the poverty line, and 3-year microcredit loans have been disbursed without any collateral security to encourage entrepreneurship in such regions. The government has already paid a huge sum of 580 billion yuan, which is about $85 billion in microcredit loans to support poor households. By the end of 2019, there were 5.5 million individuals left in extreme rural poverty in China. This number will be reduced to 0 by the end of 2020. This line graph indicates that the number of impoverished counties dropped from 832 in 2015 to 52 in 2019. The Chinese map shows whereabouts they are located. China is in the home stretch of clinching the final victory of eradicating absolute poverty. Now, I will use a real-life story to show you how China's reform and opening up in the last 4 decades have gradually improved the standard of living of the Chinese people. As a real-life example of poverty alleviation, I'm now going to tell you the changes that my uncle experienced over the years. My uncle shared with me some rare photos taken in the village where he and his family lived. Before 1978, he sustained himself and his family by carrying out some odd jobs, such as collecting stones. For his hard labor, in most cases, he didn't get a wage, but rather the food for the day. His life changed in 1978 when the government started reform and opening up and rolled out the full modernization campaign with the aim of strengthening the fields of agriculture, industry, defense, and science and technology. Under this initiative, the government created a family production responsibility system. This system leased out a piece of land to each family group. The government provided help with sourcing the grain, machinery, and teaching agricultural practices. In return, the family needed to produce an agreed quota of produce for the government. Also, they were free to use the land to grow their own products. My uncle's plot is called Bao Estate, as Bao is his last name. Becoming a farmer changed their lives dramatically. Having a dedicated piece of land for themselves meant that they were able to become self-sufficient in terms of food. It allowed them to grow rice, vegetable, and have a piggery for their meat. Being self-sufficient meant that they didn't need to have much money. A sustainable income stream was created by selling their products to the government and the local markets. They were able to send their kids to schools and eventually universities. Children on graduating and finding jobs collectively built a better house for their parents, which is evident from the image. What a contrast! Now, my uncle's lifestyle has become the dream of many city dwellers. In conclusion, China's poverty alleviation work and achievements offered valuable experience for the global fight against poverty. While striving to reduce poverty at home, China has been actively supporting the cause in other developing countries. Since 2015, China has assisted other developing countries through 180 poverty reduction projects, 118 agricultural cooperation projects, 178 aid for trade projects, 103 projects concerning ecological conservation and climate change. According to a research published by the World Bank in October last year, China's Belt and Road Initiative is expected to lift 7.6 million people out of extreme poverty and 32 million people out of moderate poverty across the world. What's next for China? As China is still facing a large urban and rural gap and regional disparity, the elimination of absolute poverty in 2020 is not the end of the poverty fight, but an indication that the country's poverty alleviation work will enter a new phase characterized by relative poverty. That's all for today. In my next video, I'll be talking about China's plan on building an ecological civilization and its struggle with climate change. So stay tuned. Don't forget to hit the bell button so that you will be notified. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in my next one. Take care.